The stars had always looked peaceful from a distance. That was the first lie the galaxy ever told itself. Far beyond the crowded core systems, beyond the trade empires and military alliances, there existed a young species growing quietly in the dark. Humanity, violent in small ways, divided by politics. Scattered across harsh colonies, strong enough to survive, weak enough to conquer. At least that was what the Carthari believed. For 11 years, the alien empire watched humanity from hidden stations, drifting between dead moons and silent asteroid fields. They observed human wars, trade routes, supply chains, colonial disputes, and military responses. Every report came back with the same conclusion. Humans were dangerous individually, but predictable collectively. A fragmented civilization, an unfinished species, easy to break before it ever unified, so the Carthari prepared carefully. They would not invade immediately. First, they would study. One live specimen, one ordinary human, someone isolated, someone unimportant, someone whose disappearance would not trigger investigation. And on a forgotten mining world beneath a rust-colored sky, they found him. The colony of Vera's brink was built into cliffs of black stone and iron dust. Storms screamed across the open flats day and night. Cargo crawlers moved endlessly through the wastelands, carrying ore toward orbit elevators that groaned like dying machines. People came to Vera's brink to disappear. Criminals, debt runners, war refugees, men and women trying to bury old names. Among them lived a maintenance worker called Elias Vane. Quiet, polite. Forgettable, he repaired coolant systems, mining rigs, transport crawlers, and damaged fusion relays. He worked alone whenever possible, never drank with crews. Never stayed in one district long enough to form attachments. But people remembered him anyway, not because he spoke loudly, because he watched too carefully. He noticed exits when entering rooms, counted security cameras without looking at them, memorized schedules, studied people silently while pretending not to. There was something deeply wrong about the calmness behind his eyes. But frontier colonies were filled with damaged souls. Nobody asked questions. Nobody knew that Elias Vane was not his real name. Nobody knew Earth authorities had hunted a man matching his profile for nearly 8 years. A killer, a ghost moving through megacities and transit systems. His victims were never left randomly. They were arranged, displayed, posed like exhibits inside abandoned buildings and forgotten tunnels. Media called him the architect because every crime scene looked designed instead of committed. And then one day he vanished. Earth believed he escaped into the outer colonies. They were correct. The Carthari found him completely by accident. The abduction happened during a dust storm. Elias drove alone across the mining flats while lightning crawled across the sky in silent blue veins. His transport crawler suddenly lost all power. Engines dead, lights gone, communications erased. The storm itself seemed to pause. Then a white glow descended from the clouds. Most humans would have panicked. Elias smiled. When he opened his eyes again, he was restrained upright inside a circular white chamber. Cold air, smooth walls, observation glass, 3 doors, 2 armed guards. 4 scientists pretending not to be nervous. Elias noticed everything immediately. The Carthari were tall and impossibly thin, their skin pale blue beneath laboratory lighting. Their movements were elegant and precise, evolved for intelligence instead of violence. They expected confusion from the human, fear, anger, begging. Instead, the human simply studied them, one by one. Like a predator learning shapes in darkness. "You are calm," the lead scientist said through a translator. Elias tested the restraints gently, then smiled. "You made a mistake." The translator paused before repeating the sentence aloud. Something about the words unsettled the room instantly. The examination began. Biological scans, neural mapping. Psychological testing. Questions about humanity, governments, military structures, colony defenses, human behavior under stress. Elias answered just enough to reinforce their assumptions. Yes, humans fought each other constantly. Yes, colonies lacked coordination. Yes, supply lines were vulnerable. Yes, authority was inconsistent. Every answer made the Carthari more confident. But while speaking, Elias was learning too. He watched how guards positioned themselves, which doors unlocked first, which scientists were respected, who panicked easiest. The Carthari believed they were dissecting a species. In reality, one human was dissecting them. Then came the question that changed everything. A Carthari scientist activated a neural pain analyzer. Does anticipation increase suffering in humans? Elias stared at him for several seconds, then answered quietly. Sometimes anticipation is the best part. Silence filled the chamber. Even the guards shifted uneasily. The lead scientist continued the examination anyway. That decision doomed the ship. 43 minutes later, Elias escaped. Security footage later showed the exact moment. One scientist leaned too close, adjusting a restraint. Elias dislocated his own thumb without changing expression, freed one hand, then moved, fast. Precise, terrifyingly efficient. By the time alarms activated, one guard was dead, another unconscious, and the human had vanished into the ship. At first, the Carthari treated it as a containment breach. Seal corridors, deploy teams, recover specimen, routine procedure. Then the bodies appeared. The first was found inside a maintenance tunnel, positioned carefully beneath emergency lighting, hands folded across the chest, head tilted toward a wall where Elias had painted a simple symbol using industrial coolant, an open cage. The second body was displayed inside the medical chamber where Elias had been examined, surgical tools arranged perfectly around the corpse. Human physiological reports scattered across the floor like artwork. The message was obvious. You wanted to study me, now study this. Panic spread quietly at first, then violently. Security teams stopped moving alone. Scientists refused assignments. Entire sectors of the ship fell silent as emergency lockdowns activated, and everywhere the human moved, the atmosphere changed. Lights failed, doors opened unexpectedly. Intercom systems whispered messages. You should have stayed hidden. You looked into the dark first. This ship learns fear quickly. The Carthari warship stopped feeling like a vessel. It became a haunted maze. The surviving crew no longer hunted the human. They avoided him. Then the command archives revealed the truth. Using fragments pulled from Elias' memory scans, Carthari analysts accessed hidden human criminal databases. The room fell silent as records surfaced. Hundreds of disappearances, unsolved murders. Psychological profiles, crime scene images. One conclusion became unavoidable. This was not a normal human. This was one of humanity's own predators, a killer his own species had failed to catch. The lead scientist whispered the realization aloud. We captured the wrong human. A security officer standing nearby answered quietly. How do we know there's a right one? That question infected the ship harder than fear itself, because suddenly every assumption about humanity collapsed. If this creature came from an ordinary civilian population, what else existed on Earth? Elias seemed delighted when he discovered the invasion files, projected colony maps, military weakness assessments, population vulnerability statistics. The Carthari had planned to conquer humanity eventually. He laughed for nearly a minute after reading them. Later, security teams discovered words written across a laboratory wall. If you think I'm dangerous, leave before meeting soldiers. After that, morale shattered completely. The human moved through the ship like living psychological warfare. He sabotaged life support in isolated sectors only long enough to create panic, cut lighting systems before attacks, used maintenance corridors to appear where impossible. Sometimes he killed, sometimes he simply watched. That became worse, because the crew never knew whether seeing him meant death was seconds away. One surviving guard later described seeing Elias standing motionless at the far end of a corridor during emergency lighting. Not attacking, not speaking, just watching. The guard fled immediately. 3 hours later, he was found dead beside an escape pod. Not killed, heart failure, fear alone destroyed him. By cycle's end, the Carthari vessel no longer functioned as military infrastructure. It functioned as terror. Entire crews barricaded themselves inside laboratories. Mutiny attempts erupted near shuttle bays. Officers argued about venting atmosphere sections even if it killed their own personnel. Nobody could track the human anymore, and somehow, he always seemed one step ahead. Then Elias reached the bridge. He didn't seize it immediately, he transformed it first. When security forces finally forced entry, they found command officers seated at their stations exactly as if still operating the ship, except they were dead. The stars beyond the viewport illuminated the scene in cold blue light. Across the central tactical display, Elias had written one sentence over the invasion plans. "Cancel this," not scratched violently, written neatly, like a museum label. One officer began crying upon seeing it, because the message beneath the deaths was unmistakable. One human had dismantled an alien warship without military training, advanced weapons, or preparation. What would organized humanity look like? That realization killed the invasion long before Elias finished killing the crew. Only one Carthari officer remained alive long enough to understand the full horror. Security Commander Thalen. Elias spared him intentionally, not out of mercy, because witnesses spread fear better than corpses. Thalen became the audience. Elias forced him to walk through the ruined ship, burning corridors. Bodies arranged like exhibits, emergency alarms echoing endlessly through smoke-filled chambers. "You wanted to understand humanity," Elias said calmly while leading him toward the bridge. "You should have observed longer," Thalen finally asked the question haunting every survivor. "Why are you doing this?" Elias actually smiled. "Because your species thought predators only existed in nature." By the time the ship descended back toward Vera's brink, fires burned through multiple decks. Internal communications were dead. Navigation systems corrupted. The mighty Carthari research vessel drifted through atmosphere like a wounded animal. It crashed beyond the colony Badlands beneath screaming dust storms. Elias stood beside the surviving commander watching distant settlement lights glow through the haze. The Carthari officer trembled beside him. "You are not normal," he whispered. Elias stared out into the storm. "No," he admitted softly, then he looked directly at the alien. "But you don't know how rare that is." The implication nearly broke him. Before leaving, Elias returned the commander to the same medical chamber where the examinations had started. He restrained the alien carefully inside the analysis frame. Activated the scanning equipment, leaned close enough for the translator to capture every word. "You wanted to understand humans." A faint smile crossed his face. "Start with helplessness." Then he released him moments later, not revenge, a lesson, a memory designed to survive forever. Outside, the dust storms swallowed the crashed vessel in darkness. Elias stepped down the loading ramp and disappeared into the wasteland. But before vanishing completely, he turned back one final time. The alien commander managed one final question. "Why spare me?" Wind roared through the broken ship. Elias answered almost gently, "Because fear travels farther than bodies." Then he vanished into the storm. Months later, the surviving commander returned to Carthari space alone. At first, leadership believed trauma had shattered his mind. One human destroying an entire covert vessel sounded impossible. Then they reviewed the recordings, the body displays, the psychological collapse reports, the invasion files marked by human hands, the criminal archives from Earth. And silence spread through the chamber, not because one human had killed so many, because they had mistaken him for average, a strategist finally argued weakly. He was exceptional. The survivor remembered Elias smiling in the dark corridors, then answered with the sentence that permanently changed Carthari history. "Would you risk your civilization betting on that?" No one answered. Within 1 year, every invasion proposal targeting humanity was canceled. Observation programs withdrawn. Covert monitoring stations abandoned. Humanity was officially reclassified as an unpredictable extinction-level threat, not because of fleets, not because of weapons. Because somewhere inside human civilization, monsters like Elias Vane could exist unnoticed among billions. And if one hidden predator could cripple an alien empire's confidence alone, what would happen if humanity ever fought seriously? Back on Vera's brink, life continued normally. Mining crawlers crossed the wastelands, storms rolled endlessly across the plains, and a quiet maintenance worker returned to his duties with a healing scar across his cheek and a calm explanation about a vehicle accident during the storms. Nobody questioned him. Why would they? Humanity still believed it was alone in the universe, and somewhere far beyond the stars, an alien civilization carried a warning whispered only in secure rooms and military briefings. Never abduct humans casually, especially the quiet ones, and remember this above all else. If that human was not a soldier, then humanity's real defenders might be far worse. If you enjoyed this journey into the dark side of humanity and the terrifying mysteries waiting beyond the stars, subscribe to Dark Galaxy Sci-Fi for more cinematic HFY stories, alien horrors, and galactic legends. Because in the cold darkness of space, sometimes humanity is the scariest thing alive.